Welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. And today's topic I want to talk about is trauma and working with children who've experienced trauma in play therapy, children and adolescents. And as I was thinking about this topic, I thought, you know what? One of the crucial first tasks for working with children, adolescents, I would even say adults and families, to engage them in the healing process. The first thing that has to be accomplished is helping them to develop a sense of safety within the within the room with you. So establishing that sense of safety and security within that therapeutic relationship and how to do that effectively. And when I was thinking about trauma and how to do that with trauma, kids who've experienced trauma, I naturally went to thinking about neuroscience and attachment theory and interpersonal neurobiology and all the things we've learned over the last several decades about these theoretical models and what science has shown us and research has shown us when we're working with clients who have experienced trauma. And most of us, I would say, use an integrative approach when we're working with people who've experienced trauma. And think about that, like an integrative approach is blending two or more models together into the approach that you're using with your clients. And so we're still using theoretical models, we're still using what the research shows us, and we're still using theory, which is then going to influence what we do and how we do it in our sessions. And I thought, well, when we're integrating, what does that mean as far as how are we showing up in the play therapy process? And that's where I thought about therapeutic rapport and how do we do that, especially when we're working with clients. And then I thought, well, what are the different components? Let's really break that down. So here you're getting a little bit of my special education background, where I can't even tell you in my bachelor's program we had a whole entire semester, one entire course on how to break things down. So your overall task that you want to accomplish, and then how do you break that down into bite-sized parts? Because depending on the student that you're working with, that may influence what part or what aspect of the learning that they might be struggling with. And so then you want to kind of go into that specific area and shore them up a little bit and help them make some progress in that area. And so when I was thinking, that's my brain goes into that mode all the time when I'm putting trainings together, and even when I'm doing these live stream topics or podcast topics. And so when I'm starting a whole new series on working with children and adolescents who've experienced trauma. So over the next few weeks, we'll be talking a lot about trauma and play therapy with trauma. And if you're interested in this topic, I do have a training coming up, healing trauma through play therapy using a neuroscience and attachment approach. Registration for that is open as of yesterday. So I'll talk a little bit more. If you're interested in that, you'll want to stick around to the end. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the training that I have coming up. So for today, what I thought about is one of the crucial tasks for working with children who've experienced trauma. I think this is true in general, and I would say it's especially true when you're working with children who've experienced trauma, is how do you create that safe space? And that is what we're going to talk about today. So if you're joining me live, I would love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments. What population do you work with? What play therapy model are you using? Are you working with children who've experienced trauma? Post those in the conversation, in the comments, and join the conversation. If you're watching the replay, I would still love to hear from you. So feel free to post in the comments. I read all of them, and I always get back to people when they comment. And for those of you that are watching on the live stream or watching the replay, the only thing that I would ask is that you not post specific information about clients that you're working with, because this is a public format and we want to make sure that we're maintaining privacy. And for those of you listening on the podcast, I would love it if you would pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, leave a comment there. I'd love to hear from you. So, also, if you find this episode useful, please feel free to share it across your social media platforms. And let's get started for today. Alrighty. So, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is really kind of the population that we're working with is children that have experienced trauma. And so if we're thinking about how to establish a sense of safety and security, then we get a lot of information from neuroscience and attachment theory over the last couple of decades about what happens when children experience trauma. So how many of you have ever had a client come in and they are kind of not really talking very much? How many of you have had this situation where you have had a client come in and maybe you've introduced them to the playroom, you've introduced them to how it all works, and they kind of keep their back turned to you a lot. They kind of keep their distance a lot. They don't really respond very much when you're engaging with them, pretty quiet, and maybe they respond with like one or two words. So what does that tell us? We're reading their cues. What does that tell us? It tells us that they're not comfortable. Or how about you have this situation happen? You have a child come in and they seem like they are bouncing off the walls. They are very talkative. They're looking at everything they start a task and they don't sustain the play very long before they want to move on to the next one. And you could just feel their high energy in the playroom. What does that tell us? So both of those scenarios would tell us that they're not really feeling safe in the session. Which means they're not going to engage, right? They're not really going to be able to access the therapeutic powers of play for healing until they feel safe. So what we've learned from neuroscience and attachment theory over the last several decades is, especially from the work of Stephen Porges with polyvagal theory, is that our neuroception circuits are constantly working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They never take a break. And they do take a break, but they're below our conscious awareness, right? So these are our neuroception circuits scanning our environment for danger to keep us safe. Our brain is wired to keep us safe. And once we feel safe, then and we've looked around and we've assessed, our brain has assessed we're safe, then we can deactivate those neuroception circuits in order to access social engagement circuits. Children can only really engage in the play circuits, so they can engage their play circuits only when they feel safe. And as a play therapist, their behavior gives us a clue about whether or not they're feeling safe and whether or not they're really able to engage in that play therapy process. I would say this is true for adolescents as well. It's going to look little different. So in adolescence, maybe they come in and they plop on the couch that you probably have or the chair that you have in your office, and they're kind of slumped in their chair, not really giving you eye contact, maybe one or two words, or maybe they're not slumped and they're giving you eye contact, but they're not really giving very much. They're giving like short answers, things like that. All of that is their body's way of saying, I don't feel safe. I'm not comfortable yet. And so I'm not really going to engage in a deeper way. And so a lot of that gives us clues about what we need to do in the beginning of the treatment process. But here's the other thing to think about. Your therapeutic rapport with your clients is also helping to change or influence neurocircuitry. We know from, like, Daniel Siegel coined the term resonant circuits, and he talks a lot about his model that he calls mindsight. Talks a lot about, I'm going to paraphrase, this is my paraphrase, how I understand it, which is creating that synchronicity between our neurosystems. So resonance circuits are my ability to connect mind to mind, as he would say in his book Mindsight, connect mind to mind with you, even physiologically. I am tuned into you, and now you're tuning into me. Our neurocircuits are syncing up, so to speak. We would call this, from an attachment standpoint, co-regulation. That's a lot of what we want we want to teach parents how to effectively co-regulate with their children to help their children feel safe and regulate their emotion circuitry. In play therapy, we're doing that as well. And as we sync up with them and we do that co-regulation in the session, then our clients will naturally kind of down regulate their threat circuits in order to feel safe and then engage in a deeper way, because now they have access to their social engagement circuits. So how do we do that? How do we engage clients who've experienced trauma specifically, is what we're talking about in this episode. So we know we need to establish that safe security. We know that this will help to co-regulate, help their emotion regulation circuitry in the play therapy process, and by helping them feel safe. And so one of the things that I thought of when I was looking at, so those of you watching on YouTube and LinkedIn, you'll notice I have these fancy little banners at the bottom of the screen. And those of you on Instagram don't get to see it because I can't use StreamYard. Well, I can use StreamYard on Instagram, but it is so clunky. So I just kind of simultaneously stream using my phone while I'm also using my computer to use StreamYard. So I got a little distracted there because my banners weren't accurate to what I was talking about, but now they are. My banners are correct. So creating that safe space for healing. And so I kind of came up with this framework that I call the B5 framework. So what is your way of being in the play therapy session? And so I'm going to go through, and these are just five components to think about as far as our way of being in the play therapy session to facilitate healing for children who've experienced trauma. I use this for all of the presenting issues that I've worked with children, adolescents. I would say adults as well. And but today we're going to talk about it specifically for trauma. And so the first one is to be fully present. Be fully present in the moment. And here's where I think that idea of resonance circuits can be extremely beneficial. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, have you ever sat in a session with a client, or you're in play therapy session and you're just still? You're just still, internally regulated, you're fully present in the moment, and you're kind of picking up on things going on with your client. Like you kind of sense maybe some fear or anxiety or anger or something. Sometimes I don't always know what it is either. It might take me a minute. And when I'm still and I'm fully present in the moment, that's when I'm really engaging my neuroception circuits to tune in and sync up. So that synchronicity between my client and myself happens when I'm fully present in the moment. And then I can use that information to help me understand what's going on, as well as help my client feel seen, heard, and understood. And how many times, how many of you have ever had this experience where you're just really having a rough day and things aren't going well, and you're just really struggling, really hurting, maybe working through a painful issue, and you go and talk to your person, right? Maybe it's your friend, maybe it's your partner, where you're telling them what's going on. They're not fixing it for you. They're just fully present in a compassionate way, helping you feel seen, feel heard, and feel understood. How healing is that, right? Just our therapeutic presence can be healing in and of itself. And so to me, that's one. So whenever I um, do training, so I do a lot of trainings, I do a lot of consultation and play therapy. So for Renewing Hearts play therapy training, that's where I have a lot of do consultation with my um, Play Therapy Academy program, and I have another membership that I launched last March, and I had to change the name on that one. So it was previous called Play Therapy Collective. It is now uh, being called Play Therapy Elevation Circle. That one is kind of closed right now because it's in the beta mode, and we're getting that one work out. But consultation in there. Play Therapy Academy is my kind of VIP, like online consultation program. And then also a lot of trainings. Like I have this trauma training coming up, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But there are three pillars that I like to focus on. I promise this will fit into the topic that we're talking about. I just want to really tie in therapeutic presence and the use of therapeutic presence. So today we're talking about therapeutic presence. It's it's one of three pillars or legs to a stool, if we want to use the stool metaphor, but it's one of three pillars that is important when we're providing play therapy. So one pillar is the use of therapeutic presence for congruence and creating that sense of safety and security, co-regulation, all those things that are important about that therapeutic use of self are therapeutic presence. That's today's topic. Balanced out with theoretical application. So how are we conceptualizing that case conceptualization using a theory model? So theory is another one that gives us wisdom of how to make sense of things and how to show up. How are we showing up? Child-centered play therapy model is going to use a different way of being in many ways than maybe Adlerian play therapy, or if you're using an integrated approach. There are similarities across all play therapy models, for sure, for therapeutic presence. And there are some differences. So your theoretical model is going to influence your case conceptualization and how you're making sense of things and how you're showing up. And then the third pillar that I like to integrate is research. So staying up to date, using those insights from research to help make sure that the play therapy model that we're using is really effective and giving us new insights about what's going to work, maybe how to think about things differently. And so to me, it's three pillars: using the insight of research with the wisdom of a therapeutic model within the context of a strong therapeutic relationship. So the first one, being fully present, is about our therapeutic presence and how that therapeutic presence is healing in and of itself. It's going to be influenced a little bit by our theory model in terms of how do we show up. But across all models, being fully present is universal, I think. And so the second thing, which ties into being fully present, the second thing is be accepting and empathic. So this is where we tap into congruence. So congruence is how am I have to really internally tap into feeling empathic and accepting. So accepting doesn't mean we don't set limits. Sometimes we set limits because in order to be accepting and empathic, we need to have limits in the playroom. There are certain things that cannot happen. Safety of toys, safety of therapists, safety of child, safety of playroom, safety of child, safety of therapists. And if something is like, here's an example. If I have, and some of it's our personal boundaries, personal limits. Like, where do I need to set a limit in order to show up being accepting and empathic? So for me, a personal limit is I cannot play board games all day long, every single day. If I had to play board games every session, every day, I would lose my mind. Like, I like board games, but there's a limit to the board games that I can tolerate. So I don't tend to use a lot of board games. I do use board games when I'm using more of an integrative approach. If I'm using child-centered play therapy and there's a board game in the room and the client wants to use a board game, we're using a board game. So there are limits. Being accepting and empathic doesn't mean we don't set limits. We do. We need to set limits so we can be accepting and empathic in the session. And so for congruence, that's where we're really tapping into internally that unconditional positive regard for our clients. And then because we're feeling it internally, it shows up externally. So our clients are, so remember, we're doing that resonant circuitry thing where we're syncing up. So in order for my client to feel safe, they also need to feel like they matter, that they are accepted, that they are valuable. That's that healing component of that therapeutic rapport. So third component is be curious. I've always kind of thought of curiosity as a way to avoid getting into clients feeling on the spot when asking questions or exploring things. There are certain, like, asking questions can automatically put people on the defensive. And so if we're exploring and processing, when we're using more of so this is non-child-centered play therapy. If you're asking questions, you are not in child-centered play therapy. Any questions? If you're asking questions, it's not child-led. But for all the other models, you can ask questions. So being curious allows that kind of non-judgmental possibility of showing up. It invites a client into process rather than making them feel like they have to ask a question. I always look at it like Columbo mode. If any of you watched the show Columbo, I've always called this my Columbo mode. Like Columbo was a detective on it was a TV show back in the 70s. Peter Falk played the detective Columbo, and he was like this kind of frumpy, unassuming guy. And he would go in and he would use curiosity to explore things with clients. Like, I'm curious about this, or I'm wondering about that, or can what can you help me understand? Or when this happened, I'm wondering what you were thinking. So, and our voice tone and all those things, we're using curiosity allows the ability to have clients feel like they have a sense of control in the session, but also permission not to answer if they don't want to. They don't have to. Because if you want to create that safe space, they need to have a sense of control and permission, again, with boundaries, in order to not, if something's activating them. So this is when they're kind of, their alarm circuits are getting activated, and they need a way to kind of deactivate a little bit and create a sense of safety for themselves. Okay, so I'm going to do a full disclosure here right now. My dog Luna, which she heard me say her name. My dog Luna has now entered the room. If you're watching on the video, you might see her, especially on LinkedIn or YouTube, you might see her little tail in the background. I've seen that sometimes when I've gone through and kind of edited some of the replays to repurpose them. I see her little tail in the background. But what you might also hear is Luna in the background moaning and scratching and flapping her ears, rolling around on the carpet. So if you hear any weird sounds in the background, it's my dog Luna. There's nothing strange going on in my background other than my dog Luna. So a fourth thing for a component of creating that safe space as a play therapist is being playful. Being playful to help children access those therapeutic powers of play. So being fully present in the moment, being accepting and empathic, being curious, will allow clients to create a sense of safety, and then they can engage their social engagement circuits to access their play circuitry. And when they can access their play circuitry, they can access those therapeutic powers of play. Plus, for children, how do you build relationship with children? You play with them. How do you build relationships with a grown-up, even a teenager, I would say? The older that teenager is, the higher the likelihood, excuse me, what I'm about to say, is to develop a relationship with teenagers and adults. You need to talk with them. Then you can get them to engage in any kind of expressive arts activity. To develop a relationship with children, you need to play with them first before you start doing tons of talking. And the thing that sets play therapy apart from just pulling out games and toys in your office is understanding how to help children, adolescents, even adults access the therapeutic powers of play. And this is where your theory model comes in, because your theory model will influence how you help children and adolescents access those therapeutic powers of play, how you make sense of what's going on in the session, and how you make sense of and figure out where they are in the change process. So play therapy is really the foundational part of that, is helping clients access the therapeutic powers of play. So being playful with children helps them to feel safe, because that's their language, right? And then they can access those therapeutic powers of play. And then the fifth component is what I call be aware. So be aware. So especially if you're using a specific theory model, then you're aware of what your theory model says about, like, the initial stage of play therapy. How are you establishing that safety and security in that first stage of play therapy? How you show up, the way you show up in sessions for child-centered play therapy is going to be a little different than, like, Adlerian play therapy or Gestalt play therapy, or even an integrated model, unless you're integrating in some child-centered play therapy in there. I know I just made people who are strict child-centered play therapists a little twitch there a little bit, and I don't mean to do that, but I think there are components of child-centered play therapy, like your way of being, your way of allowing children to lead, giving up control. I think that can be really useful. And I always say, for if all the theory models, if you want to learn how to let children lead little bit, you can learn a lot from child-centered play therapy. Um, so when you're using play therapy, you want to be aware of the theory model that you're using, even when you're using an integrated model. So you're thinking, if you're using, like, when you're working with trauma, it's not uncommon. A lot of times we'll look at cognitive distortion. So some of those lies that they believe about themselves as a result of that traumatic experience. And so let's even look at this developmental trauma, where we have the attachment wound in there with the trauma wound. And how does that influence their beliefs about themselves, others, and relationships and the world? Trauma will impact your way of experiencing the world around you, because now your threat circuits are on high alert all of the time. So you're kind of hyper vigilant. And so it's a lot of the trauma models will use components of exploring thinking errors or distortions. I call them lies that we believe, that are activating those threat circuits. And I would say even um, your and so if we're using more of a mind body model like somatic experiencing, or the trauma model that I was trained in, let's see, about like 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago, was a model that was developed by the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children. It was a model which is evidence-based. I'm pretty sure it's still evidence-based. I let my certification lapse. Just it was so hard back then to get the trainings because I had to fly to Texas, and they only offered, this is way before we started doing things on the internet like we do now. I've actually looked back into it, getting like renewing my certification. But anyway, so this specific model, really what I loved about it is accessing sensory aspects of the trauma. So understanding that trauma impacts us implicitly through our sensory circuits, that internal sensory processing, and how that mind body experiences. I'm taking information in through my body and then bottom up kind of processing, and then how does that influence top down processing. And so if we're using that model, then we're going to want to integrate in how are we using our presence for establishing that felt sense of safety and security. How are we helping children through all of their sensory aspects feel safe? So be aware of your theory model. Be aware of your language. What language are you using? How are you saying things? That's where curiosity can come in. Also, depending on your theory model, how you talk in the sessions is going to be influenced by your theory model. Definitely is for child-centered play therapy, because there's a way that you do the tracking that's going to be different than if you're using Adlerian play therapy or Gestalt play therapy. And then you also want to be aware of your nonverbals, right? So we're talking about that sensory aspect and all those nonverbal messages that we send through where we're sitting. How close is my client comfortable with me sitting? Some clients need to be farther away. Some clients want to be closer. So I'm mindful. And again, I have to be fully present in the moment to pick up on these things, right? And I'm mindful of my clients' responses to me. I'm picking up on their body positioning. I'm picking up on their nonverbal language, so I can do the last thing in this category of be aware of how you're present in sessions is be aware of you're using that information to help be aware of pacing. What is the pacing of the sessions? And you're taking in all that body language and all those nonverbals, connecting because you're fully present in the moment, resonating, syncing up, taking in all of that information to help you pace the sessions with your clients. Because if you go too fast, it will feel unsafe. And when you hit those parts in the deeper level change stage of play therapy, you're going to need them to feel safe in order to work through some of those challenging things. Your pacing is going to help to maintain that sense of safety and security in the sessions, because maybe if you've hit a kind of a really challenging spot, then maybe you follow their lead and like pull back the pacing a little bit in the session. And when I say pacing, I mean like, what are you addressing in the sessions? So for child-centered play therapy, you're always going to be following. But the other models, sometimes you're going to lead and sometimes you're going to follow. And so that pacing is going to help you be aware of knowing when you need to lead, but maybe when you need to follow, or maybe when you need to lead by doing something that's maybe more soothing to help regulate those nervous systems. So that is it for today. And let me just kind of do a quick recap. So, trauma, what we know, the impact of trauma on the nervous system when we're thinking about creating a sense of safety and security is that their nervous systems are in a heightened state of alert. And so we're going to use our therapeutic presence to help establish that sense of safety and security in the sessions. What we're also doing is getting that sense of synchronicity, syncing up with their neurosystems for co-regulation and helping their nervous system to deactivate those threat circuits so their body can feel safe. And that allows them to engage their social engagement circuits, which then allows them to engage their play circuits. And so when we're thinking about the components of creating that safe space, therapy, and that therapeutic use of self, then we're thinking about, like, the framework that I have is called the B5 framework. And you're being fully present in the moment. You're being empathic and accepting, setting limits when you need to, because you can't be accepting and empathic if you are dreading them coming into your office. And so you want to be empathic and accepting so you can really fully engage in congruence. So access congruence to demonstrate unconditional positive regard and empathy in the sessions. You want to be playful. You're accessing those therapeutic powers of play. In order to do that, you need to play with children. But also, remember, if you're working with teenagers, they need you to talk to them first a little bit before you can get them to be playful. For children, they need you to be playful, and then that helps to develop the rapport. Be curious. That helps you to invite them into the processing rather than feeling like they're put on the spot. And then be aware of your theory model, be aware of the language that you're using, be aware of nonverbals, your body positioning, and also be aware of the pacing of the sessions. So that is it for today. So if you are interested, I do have a training coming up. It's called Healing Trauma Through Play Therapy, using a neuroscience and attachment approach. So it's a one-day training. It's going to be in person in Southern Utah. It is beautiful in Southern Utah. For those of you who can't attend in person, there will be a virtual option. So case conceptualization is going to be using a neuroscience and attachment lens to really understand trauma and how trauma impacts children and adolescents, and then using that theoretical lens to look at each stage of change. So what are you working on in play therapy? What are the stages that you're working on? What are you going to do? What can you do? We'll do a lot of experiential activities. And a lot of time, I think the other part is with the trainings, I think it's also a nice time to come together with other play therapists, get ideas, get rejuvenated. So if you're able to come in person, that's awesome. If you're not able to come in person, then definitely there is a virtual option. The training is going to take place on Saturday, May 17th. So if you're interested in the training, then pop over to my website on the courses page. It's called Healing Trauma Through Play Therapy, a Neuroscience and Attachment Approach. The website is rhplaytherapytraining.com. That's renewingheartsplaytherapytraining.com/courses. So you want to pop over to the courses page and register soon. There's early bird pricing. So if you want to take advantage of that early bird pricing, then you're going to want to register soon. And that is it for today. And I will see you guys next week. Bye for now.